Millionaire landlord went to evict a tenant. He wasn't expecting anything that would shake his principles. But then he heard two little girls say something that stopped him cold. Success to Victor Grant wasn't handed out. It was negotiated, signed, and sealed. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in contracts, deadlines, and consequences. 40, Victor Grant had carved out his empire with cold precision. Every dollar accounted for, every deal executed without hesitation. Real estate was his battlefield, and he never lost. Emotions were distractions, and pain was an outdated concept he had long buried. Sympathy? That was for people with time to waste. He didn't mix business with sentiment, never had, never would. So when the property manager handed him a folder labeled Unit 3B, 3 months delinquent, Victor didn't blink. He slid the paper into his coat pocket, stepped into his black Mercedes, and drove across the city to a neighborhood he no longer cared to recognize. He wasn't here for nostalgia. His task was mechanical: knock, deliver, and leave. No questions, no conversations. But when the door creaked open, it wasn't a tenant he saw. It was two little girls, barely 5 or 6, standing barefoot in faded yellow dresses that looked too thin for the weather. Their hair was braided neatly, but their eyes, wide, deep, and uncertain, held a silence that was louder than any excuse. Victor stood frozen. Something in him paused. Not out of care, but confusion, like a machine thrown off by an unexpected input. He cleared his throat. His voice, though firm, carried an edge unfamiliar to even him. "Is your mother home?" he asked, not realizing until later that he'd spoken without sarcasm. The older girl stood in the doorway, her spine straight like she was trying to be braver than she felt, lips trembling as she shook her head slowly. "Mama said she'd be back this morning," she whispered. Her voice was small but carried the weight of uncertainty that only children abandoned too often could understand. The younger one, barely taller than her sister's shoulder, took a step forward, clinging to the edge of her yellow dress. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, the kind that threatened to fall, but hadn't yet asked for permission. "Please don't take our house," she said, barely above a whisper. "We're just waiting for Mama." Then her voice softened even more, as if recalling something precious. She said if anything ever went wrong, Mr. Grant would help us. Victor's chest went still, the breath caught somewhere between disbelief and something he couldn't name. "What did you just say?" His voice cracked, not loud, not angry, just unsteady. The older girl blinked up at him, then reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded envelope, soft at the edges, like it had been handled too many times. His full name was written across the front in a script he hadn't seen in over a decade. Emilia. He opened the letter right there on the porch, his fingers slower than usual. Inside were just a few lines scribbled hurriedly. "Victor, if you're reading this, it means I had no choice. I knew you'd come today, and I'm sorry I couldn't stay to explain. Their names are Emily and Elsie. They have no one else. I wouldn't ask if there was another way. Please, take care of them." Amelia. Victor stared at the page as the words blurred. He didn't notice the chill in the air anymore. He didn't feel the weight of the eviction notice in his coat pocket either. All he felt was a sharp, aching pulse in a place he thought had long gone silent. The world spun Amelia Rogers. She had been just another fleeting moment in his past, one of many faces lost in the blur of rising deals and restless ambition. No promises were made that night, no illusions of connection, just a brief encounter, dismissed by morning. Victor had filed it away like a name on a closed ledger, and yet standing on that porch, everything began to shift. The little girls, Emily and Elsie, were more than strangers now. There was something in the curve of their cheeks, the quiet shape of their eyes that pulled at a memory he hadn't realized still lived inside him. He studied them, silent for a moment, as if the past had sent a message written across their small faces. It was no longer just coincidence, it was unmistakable. One of the girls, Emily, reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded, smudged photo. The edges were worn, but the image still clear enough. A younger Amelia stood smiling, head slightly tilted, a hand on her hip like she was daring the world to argue with her. Victor's breath caught. He remembered. Not just the night, the way she laughed, the way she challenged him, the way she disappeared like smoke when he didn't follow up. Now here they were, the outcome of something he had long pushed to the shadows. He crouched down again, his expression unreadable, voice lower this time. "Where's your mom now?" he asked. Both girls shook their heads, their silence more painful than any answer. Victor stepped inside. The apartment was still, not just quiet, but hollow, like it hadn't heard laughter in weeks. No lights flickered, no sound hummed from a forgotten TV. There were only two small beds pushed into a corner, a couple of empty cereal boxes on the floor, and a note stuck to the fridge door in fading marker, reminding the girls how to warm up leftovers. The scent in the room was soft, lavender, maybe from their mother's clothes. Victor's jaw tightened. His hand slid into his coat and touched the folded eviction notice. Without thinking, he pulled it out, stared at it for a moment, then bent it once, then again, and again, until the paper was nothing more than torn pieces in his palm. He let them fall to the floor. Later, he returned with food from a nearby diner. Warm, simple, filling. The kind of meal that wrapped itself around your ribs. He sat at the small kitchen table, unsure of what to do with his hands, feeling like a stranger in a space that was both bare and sacred. The girls didn't wait for permission. Emily and Elsie devoured their food with quiet urgency, as though each bite had to be earned, as if warm meals weren't something that came often. Victor said nothing. He just watched. Watched how they sat pressed shoulder to shoulder like they drew strength from each other. Watched how they leaned toward whispers before speaking aloud, as if the truth was safer in hushed tones. But what unsettled him most was how often their eyes drifted to the door, again and again, like hope itself was a sound they were straining to hear. And then slowly, they moved closer to him. Emily was first. She reached up and placed her tiny hand on his sleeve, like it was something fragile. Then Elsie followed, curling up beside him without a word. Within minutes, the two girls were nestled around him, one resting her head on his arm, the other wrapping her arms around his side, like he was the last solid thing in a world full of shifting ground. Victor didn't know how to respond. His body remained still, unsure, but his heart, long silent, began to pulse in ways it hadn't in years. They didn't say they trusted him. They didn't have to. That night, Victor didn't leave. He stayed with Emily and Elsie, quietly settling into the dim space that barely felt like a home. He didn't know what compelled him to stay, only that walking away felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. As the girls curled into their small beds, he pulled the thin blanket up to their shoulders, his hand moving gently over their backs, steady and unfamiliar. They clung to his presence, their breathing slow, their trust unspoken. He stayed by their side, one hand resting on the edge of the mattress, the other holding his phone to his ear. He made the calls in hushed tones, first to every hospital in the city, no record of Amelia, then to a private investigator. "Find her," he said quietly, "and keep this between us." When the girls were fast asleep, he rose carefully and wandered through the apartment. There was barely anything left of Amelia here. No framed photos, no personal touches, except for one image on the wall, crooked and cracked, its glass chipped at the corner. He moved closer. It was her. A younger Amelia, eyes fierce and warm, stood smiling beside two unknown faces. The frame hung as if forgotten, left behind in a life moving too fast to catch its breath. Victor exhaled, long and low. She never told him, not once. And why would she? What were they really? A few stolen nights that dissolved the moment he signed that New York deal. He'd never looked back, never asked. He leaned against the wall, holding his breath as if still expecting to wake up and find it all imagined. But it wasn't. She hadn't warned him, hadn't asked for help, and he hadn't even known there was something, someone, to lose. His thoughts circled. Had she meant to tell him? Did she stand on the edge of reaching out, then decide against it? And the girls, were they? He caught himself. Even now in the middle of this storm, part of him reached for control, for certainty. But another part, the one quietly stirring back to life, knew it didn't matter anymore. Morning light crept slowly into the apartment, filtering through thin curtains that barely softened the harshness outside. Victor had barely slept. He'd spent the night on the worn couch, keeping one ear open, one hand resting near his phone, his mind circling questions he still couldn't answer. When the girls stirred from their beds, sleepy and blinking against the new day, he was already up. He greeted them quietly, offering a calm they could lean into. He helped them wash their faces, combed through their tangled hair with patient fingers, then pulled out the new clothes he had gone out to get while they were napping the evening before. Warm sweaters, soft leggings, socks with little clouds on the toes. As he helped Elsie into hers, she looked up at him with cautious eyes. "Are you taking us away now?" He paused, buttoning the last snap on her collar, then knelt to her level. "No," he said gently. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." He turned to Emily next, helping her into a pink hoodie and carefully tying her shoes. The trust in their eyes weighed heavier than any deal he had ever closed. It was silent, total, and undeserved. But there, when they were dressed and ready, Victor stood, pulled out his phone, and called home. "Clear out the guest wing," he said to the housekeeper. "Make sure it's warm, clean. We have family coming." By the third morning, his penthouse was a different world. Teddy bears lined the hallway. Crayons were scattered across the living room table. Tiny shoes sat by the door next to his polished leather ones. At 6 a.m., he stood barefoot in his kitchen, pouring cereal into 2 bright bowls as the girls sat at the counter, wrapped in soft fleece blankets. Their hair was still messy from sleep, but their eyes were clear, watching him with the quiet kind of faith that made his chest tighten. They didn't ask when their mother would return. They didn't ask what came next. They just watched him like he was the only thing left holding their world in place. And that made it harder, because Victor Grant, a man who once lived by schedules, contracts, and control, had no answers, only questions, and the growing fear that when the truth finally arrived, it would break something in all of them. The call came late, the kind that freezes everything around it. "Victor," the investigator said, her voice low, hesitant. "I found her. Emilia. She's alive, but she's in a coma. Car accident. No identification. She's been in a county hospital listed as Jane Doe for almost 3 weeks." The words hit harder than he expected, leaving the room spinning as his heart dropped into silence. That night, Victor drove alone through the city, headlights blurring through his windshield as if the world itself was holding its breath. When he reached the ICU and stepped into that sterile, humming room, his chest locked. There she was, Emilia, motionless, bruised, wrapped in wires and surrounded by machines that spoke in beeps and pulses. Her face, though battered, still carried the same quiet defiance he remembered. Victor sank into the chair beside her, fingers trembling as he reached for her hand, not even sure if she could feel it. The words caught in his throat, scattered and unsure. I didn't know," he said, voice cracking, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you had my children. I didn't know I was supposed to be there for them. For you." He swallowed hard, guilt rising like a tide. "It was supposed to be nothing. Just one night, I thought. But I should have stayed, or asked, or checked." His head dropped forward, forehead nearly brushing her hand. "I'm sorry, Emilia. God, I'm so sorry. I should have found you sooner. I should have been a father sooner. I hope..." He paused, breath shaky. "I hope you can hear me. I need you to hear me." But Emilia didn't stir. The only response came from the quiet hiss of oxygen and the slow rhythm of machines keeping her between 2 worlds. 2 days passed before the envelope arrived, small and heavy with truth. Victor held it in his hands far longer than necessary, his pulse loud in his ears as he stared at the seal like it might disappear on its own. When he finally opened it, the words on the page struck like a silent collapse. Not a biological match. He wasn't their father, not by blood, not even close. For a long moment, the room seemed to tilt, the floor threatening to fall away beneath him. The shame stung sharp, shame for hoping, for wanting it to be true, for letting himself believe those girls were his in some destined, redemptive way. But as quickly as the hurt came, so did the memory of Elsie's voice, trembling and soft. "Please don't take our home." He remembered how Emily had gripped his hand with that fragile, fierce trust, and something in his chest didn't shift. It didn't pull away. It only rooted deeper. That night, he brought them into his study, just the 3 of them. No servants, no distractions, only truth and the man who had quietly chosen them. He knelt in front of the girls, steadying his voice, though his heart cracked with every word. "I need to tell you something," he said, watching their faces tense. "I'm not your real dad, and I don't know if your mom is going to wake up." He paused, not to spare their feelings, but to make sure they truly heard what came next. "But I'm here. I'm not leaving. No matter what happens, I'll protect you. No one's ever going to hurt you again." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Elsie's shoulders began to shake, tears slipping down her cheeks. Emily lunged forward and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on as if afraid he might vanish. "I knew you were good," she whispered through quiet sobs. And in that moment, Victor Grant, who once believed in nothing but control and consequence, discovered a promise stronger than blood, the kind made not by birth, but by love. Weeks slipped by with a quiet persistence as Amelia slowly fought her way back to consciousness. Each day a little clearer, her mind still fragile, but no longer lost in fog. Victor remained beside her through it all, adjusting her pillows, reading her the news in a calm, steady voice, showing her pictures of Emily and Elsie with soft patience, hoping something in their smiles would stir the truth from within her. One morning, as the sun poured gently through the hospital window, she turned her head to face him fully, eyes rimmed with guilt that seemed older than her injuries. "Why did you leave them?" he asked, not in anger, but with the ache of a man who had been carrying too many unanswered questions. Amelia looked away, her lips trembling before words could form. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, tears spilling before she could stop them. "I didn't know who their father was. I wasn't proud of the life I was living then. I was sleeping with men for money because I had to. My family depended on me for everything: rent, food, school fees. I didn't have the luxury of shame until I found out I was pregnant." Her voice cracked, her fingers clenching the blanket. "When I told my family they didn't want the babies, they told me to give them up or leave. I was alone. Raising them broke me piece by piece, but I couldn't abandon them. Not after everything." She paused, eyes fluttering closed, voice barely a whisper now. "I didn't know where to go. I was tired, just so tired. Then one day I recognized you. I remembered you from years ago. We barely knew each other. It was just a night, a blur really. But you were different, quiet, cold maybe, but not cruel. And I thought, maybe you'd help. I didn't expect anything. I just hoped." She covered her face with her hand as sobs took over. "I'm sorry for all of it." Victor sat frozen, watching the rawness of her unravel. The truth laid bare, not in defiance, but in regret. In that moment, it wasn't shame he saw. It was a woman who had survived far too much alone and had finally dared to hope that someone might still catch her before she fell again. 6 months later, Amelia had not only recovered but had begun rebuilding her life, one step at a time. With Victor's quiet influence and well-placed connections, she secured a respectable job. Nothing flashy, but steady and dignified, one that allowed her to stand on her own and care for Emily and Elsie with pride. She no longer looked over her shoulder or measured her worth in survival. She stood taller now, not because the world had changed, but because she had finally begun to believe she could. Victor never took credit, never overstepped, but he showed up, consistently, without fanfare. He dropped by with little gifts that somehow always felt perfectly chosen. A book with dragons for Emily, a paint set for Elsie, and once a keychain with all their initials on it, which Amelia still kept in her purse. He became the man they ran to with drawings, the one they waited for by the window on Saturday mornings. Uncle Victor, they called him, a title that fit better than any other. In moments when the world felt heavy, he'd kneel beside them and remind them gently, "You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to stay when it counts." And in that ordinary house filled with second chances, something extraordinary was growing, not out of luck or accident, but out of choice. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can offer isn't rescue or riches, it's presence. It's believing in someone until they believe in themselves. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real family looks like after all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.